Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is JJ and I'm a reader, a writer, a storyteller, and a fiction lover from Colorado. And today I wanted to do a little reading wrap-up. 2024 has come to a close. We're looking ahead at 2025. And I wanted to go back and kind of look at and talk about all of the books that I read in 2024. I am a very wide genre reader, so I have some nonfiction in here, I have some middle grade and young adult in here, I also have some adult suspense in here, which is about how I would like it. This is exactly the kind of mix that I hope to have every year, so I did succeed in that count. I'm also a very realistic person. I don't have nearly as much free time as I used to. I'm the kind of person who, back in high school, I wasn't into video games, and it was before Netflix was streaming accessibly onto iPads and everything, so watching things as a pastime was not quite as easy, so I read a lot of books in high school. And then college happened, and I had to read for school, and I kind of lost that intrigue in having the free time to read, and anyway, other things became more accessible, like streaming TV shows instead, and it took a lot less brain power. So I've been slowly trying to return to the standard of reading that I had in high school, but realistically, in order to do that all the time, I would have to read instead of everything else that I like to do. So on this channel, I'm a very realistic person. I set a goal of 12 books to be read in 2024. I'm not going to hit that goal. I have a full-time job, I do YouTube, and also I like my social life. And so in order for me to do that realistically, I just can't spend as much time reading as I would have done in the past. So I'm not going to hit that goal. However, I got really close. And so I want to talk about the books that I read, the books that I'm currently reading, so that I'll finish those coming up. Some of these books will have their own reviews on this channel at other points. So you'll see those. You may have already seen some of those. That's super fun. And I love being able to talk about books like that. Some of them I didn't want to do a full review of, and I might change my mind and do a full review in the future, but for a lot of them, this is kind of that opportunity for me to talk about the books that I've read. So, without further ado, I guess we'll just dive right in. Also, where I listened to these books in audiobook instead of reading the physical copy or an ebook, I'm going to try to note that, because I think that it's really important that reading is accessible and that books are accessible, and having an opportunity to have books as a way of entertainment in the midst of some of these other options, like when you're driving or when you're working out. It's important. Even I've found I like to listen to an audiobook while I'm working on a build in Minecraft. That can be a really fun way to kind of pass the time in both regards, because I always feel like I need to be doing something while I'm listening to an audiobook, and I love to play Minecraft, so I may as well merge those two together. And if you're just mining for a long time and you're just getting resources and materials, listening to an audiobook while you play is actually surprisingly helpful and powerful. And then you get to do both at the same time. Multiple pastimes at the same time, multitasking. Right? We love it. Anyway, so that's what this is. This is the reading wrap-up of 2024. When I listened to something rather than read a physical copy of something, I'm going to try to note that. And because of that, also, there's going to be some that I can hold up and some that I'm just here's the cover, right? So, without further ado, the things that I read in 2024. Starting off, and we're not going in any particular order. I don't remember the order in which I read these. Even Goodreads wasn't that helpful for keeping track of the order in which I read all of these books, because I'm a mood reader and I read a lot of things at the same time, and then I wrap up things at different points depending on where I'm at and what I need, right? If I need an audiobook versus a physical book, or an ebook because I'm traveling rather than having the paperback or the hardcover with me, that makes a big difference. And some of them that I have on my shelf in physical form, I listened to an audiobook because that's what I had time to in order to actually absorb the story and what I had access to. So without further ado, let's begin. First book, because it's on the top of the pile, Percy Jackson and the Olympians, Wrath of the Triple Goddess. The short version of this is that I loved this book. I had a couple little things that got to me about the ending and the climax, but generally speaking, I really, really enjoyed this book. I have been a fan of Riordan for as long as I can remember. I think one of my friends recommended him to me in middle school, and I haven't stopped reading him since, and I don't know that I ever will. As long as he is still writing, I will continue to read what he writes. Percy Jackson has been one of my favorites for a very long time, and so to have more in that series is so fun. I love seeing all of these characters over and over and over again. It makes me so happy. So, all that to say, I am so pleased that we get more Percy Jackson. This full review will be going up soon. Next up, I am actively reading this one, so I'm not quite done with it yet, but I'm really enjoying it. I love the insight that it's giving. It is Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis. I started trying to read this one in college at one point, and I tried to kind of like dip into and out of it, and it's not the kind of book that you can just like find what you're looking for and then leave. You do kind of have to read it start to finish, cover to cover, and a lot of that is because Lewis is setting up his arguments and his positioning based off of the previous chapters, right? So he's introducing ideas, and it's his journey to faith in a lot of ways. It's his ideas behind what makes up the very basic levels of like what is Christianity at its core. And that's what this book is. And so it starts off very, very like, do you agree? Can I convince you, perhaps even, that logically, if you're looking at the world through the lens with which we have to perceive the world, which makes more sense? That something was involved in its creation or that it happened by chance? And he kind of like builds his argument from there. I love this book. His argument is very much, I mean, it's kind of old-fashioned English. All of his words, it's beautiful writing, by the way. All of his words carry so much more weight than the language that we use now to discuss things. And I think that's one of the most interesting things about this book, is his words carry so much more meaning than modern English tends to do. And I am so impressed by the fact that he's able to do that so concisely. Highly recommend it if it's up your alley. This is a good one. Next up, this one actually was produced by the publishing house that I work at. I read it in about 2 hours or less. It's a very quick, very easy little children's read, but it is What Bear Said by Jack Wiens. It is so cute. It is fully illustrated with all of these different little like life lessons. Boy has a lot of questions. Bear has a lot of wisdom. Boy asks his questions, and it's like written in a question and then answer kind of format. It's ideal for reading aloud with children or kind of starting conversations with kids and teens. If I'd had this as a teen, it would have given me a lot of good opportunities as like a read with my mom, right? To be able to discuss things together. Super cute book. Like I said, super fast read, so you can kind of read it and then give it to your kids. I loved it. It's adorable. Highly recommend. And I'm not just saying that because I was part of the production team. It's really, actually, genuinely a really good book. Next up, another one that I'm actively reading is Everyone This Christmas Has a Secret by Benjamin Stevenson. You may remember in a book review of one of his other books, Everyone in My Family Has Killed Someone, which I think when I was doing the review, I was actually showcasing a different cover of this book. This book has so many different covers. I kind of adore it. But this is the cover that I now have that I get to put on my shelf. I'm so excited. Anyway, this one I did not read this year, so this is not actually part of the video. But if you know this book, this is the same author. He also has one other mystery that I have yet to read, but they're written like Golden Age mysteries, so you can read them out of order and it genuinely works, which is super fun. And this one is the holiday special. These books are full of writer humor and publishing humor. So if you are a mystery writer or you are a writer who wants to learn how to write mysteries, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. This author he's so funny. He's so funny. I adore his style. He doesn't shy away from writing the gore of murder, but he also is like taking a nice, funny perspective on it. So it's still a lighthearted story, even when there's like gruesome murder. He also is blatantly obvious in what he's doing. He knows that he's writing for mystery writers for the most part. And so he's telling you like, I know that was a little bit of a cheap trick to do that cliffhanger to you, but it did happen, and who would I be if I didn't utilize it, right? It's hilarious. Highly recommend. Also, this Christmas special is written like an advent calendar, designed to be read in 24 chapters. You read one chapter every single day, and then you have solved the case by Christmas Eve. Or you can do what I'm doing and read it all at once, which admittedly is what people do with advent calendars as well, where you just open it up and eat all of the chocolates all in one go. So ultimately, it's up to you. You can do whatever you want with it, but it's nice and short, which is kind of helpful, especially if you're trying to like meet those end of year reading goals. I might actually get to finish this one before 2024 is over. We will see. Another one that I read, this one, like Mere Christianity, I'm actually reading this one I read this one with a group. We have a little book club kind of scenario, and I really loved this book. This is another good one if you are exploring faith for the first time and trying to like figure out where your relationship with God might be, or just trying to find words to discuss the different possible viewpoints of a relationship with God from a Christian perspective. Skye Jethani is fantastic at putting things into words and viewing the different perspectives that a lot of people bring to religion and helping you understand where the flaws are with all of those and approaching them from a perspective of how do we potentially fix that. So really impactful book, really well written, really, really good, solid viewpoint in terms of like, how do you view your relationship with God and where do you go from there? This is with, by the way, the cover is kind of hard to read the title of, but really interesting cover design as well. From a cover designing book production perspective, this is not something that I would have thought to do, but I kind of love it. Another one that I read, this one, actually, I listened to in audiobook form, but I happen to have it on my shelf. I know this review is already live on my channel, so you're gonna have to go find that one. Again, short version is I loved it. I can't stop thinking about it. It's really a very interesting perspective on fame and the internet. So if you are creating things online and you want to become famous, I recommend reading this book because Hank Green has a lot to say about fame and the impact of the internet and how it influences everything you ever do. And even like how it impacts your psyche as you're thinking about and like going through life. Like I was just telling a friend a funny story I had and how the very first thought I had after it happened was A, that was public embarrassment, and B, I have this strong urge to make that embarrassment even more public by talking about it online, which is one of those crazy things that happens when you're making content online. And it's worth noting that Hank Green talks about that in that book. So if you're a content creator, you should read that book. It's fiction, but it's a really interesting commentary. Next up, another book that I did read in print, but I got it from the library a long time ago, so I don't have it now. Beta by M.T. Zimny. This is such a fun young adult superhero dystopia kind of style book. The main character has no superpowers. Super interesting, super fun. Highly recommend it. It gave me a lot of the nostalgia of, and this was the whole point, right? Zimny decided to go out and write a sort of boarding school book because growing up, and I think she's probably around my age, but we grew up with a lot of those books around kids who went off to school and got into hijinks. Percy Jackson is summer camp, but the same vibe. Harry Potter, right? He goes off to school and all of this chaos ensues, but he doesn't really have parents he can go talk to about it because it's all the school personnel. It's all of his, the school dynamics and managing a schedule and going to classes and getting your homework done, but also saving the world in the process. And it's a very fun, nostalgic kind of read if you're looking for that. Plus, it's superheroes, which is so fun. That is not a genre that's really taken off in book form very well. But it's not that far removed from fantasy, magic, and witches. So if you like characters with uncanny abilities, but you want to see it in more of a normal city setting, you gotta go read this book. It's so fun, so good. And you might even be able to get it from your library, which is super cool. That's how I got it. I got it from Interlibrary Loan. Because I'm all about supporting authors, and I'm also all about saving money. So reading, talking about books, two of the best possible ways that you can help support an author's career, even if you can't necessarily buy the book yourself. And if you can buy the book, please do. It makes a huge difference, especially for independent authors like MT Zimney. Next up, this was another one that I read from the library, and this is one that I got first in ebook, and then I got it first in ebook, and then I finished it in print, I believe, because I had to return the ebook, but it was just sitting on the shelf at the library, so that was pretty nifty. This is The Match by Harlan Coben. It is apparently book 2 in the series, which turns out I have book 1 sitting on my shelf. Which one is it? Where's all of my Harlan Coben books? Here's one of them. I think it's this one. Oh, it's one of these two. It's one of these two. I think it's this one. I think this is the first book. Yeah, this is the first book in the series that I haven't read yet. I'm reading them out of order. Turns out that's totally fine, and you can do that with this series, so it's good to know. I look forward to reading this one, but The Match was really cool. It was a mystery based around, it was like a mystery and personal drama based around DNA websites. Because Wild, the main character, he was abandoned in the woods and he was found as a young kid and then eventually adopted, but he has no idea who his family is or where he came from. And the boy from the woods goes into how he was found and all that jazz. The match happens later on when he's an adult and is following him trying to find his family and trying to figure out where he came from. And in the process, he matches with somebody on this DNA site as a cousin, I think, if I remember right. But then that cousin goes missing, and he's this high-profile celebrity from a dating TV show. And he goes missing, and people assume he's dead. They assume he killed himself. But the whole thing is, did he actually do that? Did he fake his death? Where is he? And, that's the whole mystery plot. So Wild has to go on this adventure to, kind of unravel the interpersonal threads with people who may or may not actually be related to him, right? Which is not exactly the storyline you're looking for when you're trying to find your relations. Super interesting kind of plot point for that one, and I know there's a lot of other things going on with DNA matching sites in the news, so if you're curious about how any of that goes, that could be a fun book to read. What's next? Daughter of the Deep by Riordan. Another book that I read via audiobook. I started it as audiobook, and then I'm pretty sure I downloaded it as an ebook just so I could finish it. It took me a really long time to get through it, not because the book wasn't good, but because it was my workout book. And I was listening to it I was only allowed to listen to it while I went to the gym, which is great motivation to go back to the gym and keep working out and walk longer on the treadmill. But it does mean that if you're not very consistent in it, it does take a long time to go through books if you actually hold yourself to that reality and that requirement. So it took me a long time to get through that book. But essentially, we all know Rick likes to write based off of legend and mythology. And so Daughter of the Deep is Jules Verne inspired. Journey to the Center of the Earth, Jules Verne, right? And 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne. Captain Nemo, Jules Verne, right? That was unexpected. I didn't see that one coming, and that was so cool. Like, I should have. It was obvious if you like if you knew the legends and you knew those storylines ahead of time. But I am not that familiar with it, and so I didn't really know where I was going, and that was the coolest thing. It's also young adult, so it's a little bit older, kind of like these new Percy Jackson books. It's a little bit older of an audience targeted, high school and like early college kind of age group rather than 11-year-old, 13-year-old and up kind of readership. Super interesting around the world sea nautical adventures. So if you love like sci-fi with spaceships where it's like really like captain and orderly and like following the orders of whoever's in charge on a ship, there was so much going on with that as well that it was really cool to see it in a book, but it was also kind of hard to like follow at some points to know who was who and what was going on. But similar style actually to like being able to sort yourself into different houses, like which house would you be at this school? Are you like a dolphin? Are you a cephalopod? Are you an orca? Are you like, and there's different categories that you can kind of sort yourself into. And had it gone better, had it sold better, had a wider readership or whatever, I think people definitely would have been sorting themselves into houses in the same way that people sort themselves into like the Greek god cabins of Camp Half-Blood. I just haven't seen this one take off in that way. But if you're looking for another one to like do a little personality test with and figure out like, ooh, which house would I be? Sharks are another one. I think personally I would probably be probably a cephalopod. I do love puzzles. Although I'm not sure that I'm not good at them, but I do love them. We'll see. You'll have to go read it and let me know what you think. And if you have an idea of which house I would be in for that book after you read it, leave a comment. Let me know. Another audiobook that I read and that I loved and that there will be a review of on this channel coming up, or possibly already posted, little teaser, is Home is Where the Bodies Are by Jeneva Rose. This book, again, very short version because it gets its own video, gripped me tight and I binged it in 8 hours. I could not stop listening. I was making excuses to keep listening to this audiobook, right? Like started an entirely new Minecraft world just so I could like not have to work that hard and pay attention to the book. Walking, folding my laundry longer than I needed to. Like I was making up excuses to be able to finish this book. It is so good, okay? It is about a family who's experiencing and going through like the death of their mom. So 3 siblings come home. They've been estranged. They come home and converge just to deal with the affairs of their mom and kind of like see her through, bury her, all that jazz. And then they find this video footage of their dad standing over a dead body and a pact between their dad and their mom to get rid of it and not tell anybody about it. And then they have to figure out what to do with that, right? And so it's these 3 siblings who can't get along to save their lives trying to figure out how to make the right decisions in this like impossible closed case scenario. Nobody's found any new evidence for a very long time about this girl. And the video itself is not that clear. Like, did their dad do it? Did their dad not do it? Who did kill this? Did they just find her? But if they just found her, why did they hide it? Like all that jazz. There's a lot of mystery going on in it. In the midst of all of this, also grieving and processing that and dealing with like, you know, what do you do when you know the truth and the person that it's impacting is right next door, but they've already moved on? Do you reopen old wounds or do you not, right? Such an interesting book. I was making excuses for myself to just keep listening to it. I loved it so much. It's so good. Highly recommend. Another audiobook that I listened to, and frankly, I can't imagine experiencing this book not in audiobook form. A lot of the other ones, you could tell that they were written to be read, not necessarily written to be listened to. But the Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, he has so much experience doing podcasts and doing YouTube videos and sharing his thoughts on the world in a spoken manner that listening to the Anthropocene Reviewed, read by John Green himself, with some additional chapters that were only available because of the audio format, that was such a cool experience, and I literally can't imagine experiencing that book in any other way. It was the kind of book that I was making excuses to listen to. I had a lot of work trips this summer where I was driving to and from the airport, and so I listened to it every time I went to the airport. I listened to it. I had a little bit of a medical scare, and I was like, okay, I might have a lot of medical appointments to be driving to. Thankfully, I didn't. I didn't have to listen to it any more than that one time, but it was really helpful to help me like not be totally anxious on my way to these doctor's appointments all the time. And it gave me, I listened to it every morning while I ate my breakfast, right? Like I couldn't stop listening to it. And the Anthropocene Reviewed, which Anthropocene is a really big word that's a little bit intimidating. This book is not intimidating. It's about humanity and our impact on the planet, and also our impact on each other, and looking at the era in time in which humans are the top dogs, right? And reviewing the things that make humanity so beautiful and complicated and lovely. And at the same time, in some ways, it's also like a memoir of John Green, right? It's you get stories from his life because it's his perspective on the world that we live in and how the world that we live in got to be how it is. Simultaneously, it's giving us information about all of the different random historical things that he's researched over the years, like board games, like Monopoly, right? And grocery stores. Why are grocery stores the way that they are? I had never taken the time to think about that. John Green did. He did a lot of research into it, and he put it all into the Anthropocene Reviewed. It is a series of reviews of the things that make humanity so lovely and also so horrible, right? And also the things that are purely to be enjoyed by humans in some regard, you know? And it's just a lovely, beautiful book if you want to sit and think deeply and just have somebody else do a lot of the heavy lifting for that thinking, though. Like, you get to just like engage in these topics with John in the way that he does. So it's very easy to jump into and out of because they're related, but they're not like that interrelated. I loved that book. Highly recommend it. It feels like a hug for humanity in a lot of ways, which is lovely and wonderful. And it's great. Another one that I'm currently reading, and again, I don't know if I'll finish this before the end of the year. We'll see, because I'm filming this at the end of 2024. However, this one is The New Neighbor by Carter Wilson. And I started this one a while ago in print, and then I had to return it to the library. So now I'm listening to it in audiobook. And that adjustment did take me a second because in print, when you're reading a book for yourself, and this is kind of one of those things about audio versus print in general, right? When you're reading a book for yourself, you have your own interpretation of what these characters sound like. You have your own cadence, your own rhythming, your own even understanding of the accent, right? Or lack thereof of these characters. Some authors will put in a lot of effort to like have you experience this character in a very specific way. Some authors will not. And something that went over my head the first time I started reading The New Neighbor by Carter Wilson is that the main character is Irish. And I didn't realize that, not like fully, not totally comprehending it, until I listened to the audiobook, and the narrator is, in fact, Irish. Which is great. It's a lovely little detail to include in that. I just it took me a second to be like, wait, what is happening? Why did they do this? And then I realized, oh, because he is in fact the correct narrator for this book. And once I was used to it, it's totally fine. And it's a really, really well-produced audiobook. And it is not the storyline that I was expecting, because this guy wins the lottery after his wife dies. And he buys this new house. And things are not all well in the neighborhood. So I'm still figuring out what's going on in this plotline because, again, I'm just starting it. But I'm hooked. It's interesting. It's clever. It's a little bit twisty. And I'm enjoying it a lot. So that's another one that I'm reading right now that I hopefully I'll finish it. If not, it'll be one of my first finished books for 2025. I think that's all of the things that I read or am currently reading in 2024. I had a lot of fun reading books this year. I had a really good time trying to dive back into the joy of reading. I think sometimes when you work in the industry, like I do, because I work in the publishing industry, I work at a publishing house selling books for a living, right? When you work in the industry, it can get a little bit hard to still enjoy the products that you're creating. And there's a lot more writing on the books that you read, So like, I get access to all of the books that I publish, and I can read them all. But in marketing, it gets a little bit tricky to not have a boundary around still reading for fun, because even if I'm reading the books that we produce, and even if they're lovely, fantastic books, I can't turn off that work part of my brain of, okay, how do I sell this? Whereas if they're not books that I'm financially invested into, there's a good chance that I'll be able to just enjoy them. It's way easier to tell somebody about a book that you haven't read than it is, in some regards, it's way easier to tell somebody about a book that you haven't read than a book that you have read and didn't like. And that's always a risk with every book that you pick up, even if you love the author. Like, even if they're your best friend, there's still a risk that you're not going to like what they created. And that gets a little bit tricky and a little bit dangerous. Anyway, so that's just some thoughts. Also, quick note about audiobooks versus print books, right? I mentioned this a little bit before, but one of the things that happened in the transition from listening to Daughter of the Deep by Riordan versus reading it in an ebook is the narrator of Daughter of the Deep did not capture Rick's humor in the way that I usually pick up on it. And so the cadence of the jokes, I think the book would have been much funnier, so much funnier, had I been reading it and not listening to it. And that's one of those things that, like, having the right narrator for an audiobook is so important. And she was absolutely a brilliant narrator. There was a lot of different accents, a lot of different languages, a lot of different things going on in this book. Like, to find a narrator who could carry that off so well, so difficult. And they found it, they did it, right? But one of the things that got missed in that is the cadence of Rick's humor. I have been laughing at Rick's writing for so long that I'm so accustomed to finding, like, oh, he put in a joke there, right? And so it took me a little bit to get used to reading this very serious listening to this very serious narrator, when the circumstances would have been so much funnier had I just been reading it. So I think that's also something to keep in mind if you, like, know an author's voice really well because you've been reading them for a long time versus listening to them. And that's one of the funny things too about, like, listening to books, because I listened to both An Absolutely Remarkable Thing and The Anthropocene Reviewed. John and Hank Green both have very well-known, very documented instances of their cadence, their rhythm, and their voice. It is a very good thing that John Green was reading The Anthropocene Reviewed. I don't know who else could have read that audiobook. It wouldn't have been possible. Obviously somebody else could have read it, but it would not have been the same brilliant experience that it was, given that he was the narrator as well. Same thing with An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. Like, that is a very Hank Green book, and I could hear his voice in the writing of it, even when it wasn't his voice who was doing the speaking of the reading of it, right? It's brilliant to have this format where you can, like, hear their own. I'm so familiar with their voices because I've been a long time watcher of Vlogbrothers. I listened to their podcast Two Back and Forth, which right now I can't think of it. I'll put the photo here. And it's lovely to me that we can have that sort of thing, but being so familiar with their voices meant that, like, it kind of, I could hear them in the reading, even if I, like, was only, and that's what I'm saying about Riordan's work too. Like, I've listened, like, reading the Percy Jackson books, I laugh so often, and that humor was still present in Daughter of the Deep, but it was lacking because of the way that the narrator was reading. She was so serious, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just one of those interesting, like, things about audiobooks versus non-audio format, which is it's just interesting to me. Being in the industry and thinking about how books are produced all the time. Anyway, that is all of the books that I read in 2024. Have you read any of these books? Are you going to go read any of these books? Did I talk you into it? I really did enjoy pretty much every single book I read this year. And a lot of that is because I'm constantly looking for things to enjoy about books rather than things that I might not enjoy. Like, I'm not likely to keep reading a book that I'm not enjoying. That doesn't mean that every single book is my favorite book ever, but I am a very lenient reviewer. If I enjoyed the process, it gets at least 4 stars most of the time, because that's just who I am. I don't like being harsh. If I enjoyed the book, it's usually a 4 or 5 star read, even if it's not the best book I've ever read in my entire life. Those were all of the books that I read in 2024. I loved pretty much all of them. I really highly recommend you go read all of them, and I will, as much as I can, put a list where you can go buy them, so you can go get a copy from bookshop.org, which is really cool. I don't know if you're familiar with bookshop.org, but they're an online bookstore that supports various other brick and mortar bookstores and other independent bookstores. So even though you're not buying directly from those bookstores, it helps keep independent bookstores alive. And you can kind of you can determine which bookstore you want to support with your sales, which is really cool, or with your purchases, which is really cool. So I'll make my list of my recent reads and I'll put it down below, or my 2024 reads. I don't know. There's going to be a link. You go enjoy that. And until next time, I will see you then. Happy reading, happy writing, happy story consuming. Happy 2025.